Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the absolutely fascinating chronological narrative of Japan's post-war economic miracle and its subsequent decades-long stagnation. We are going to trace exactly how a nation went from absolute devastation to global dominance and then just flatlined. Okay, we really have to juxtapose two very different eras to understand why this recovery was instantly dubbed a miracle. Think about this for a second. In 1945, two Japanese cities were completely vaporized. 66 others were destroyed by firebombing, and industrial production had collapsed to just 15%. I mean, citizens were literally eating acorns and sweet potato vines just to survive. But fast forward just 23 years to 1968, Japan is suddenly hosting the Olympics, launching futuristic bullet trains, building massive skyscrapers, and boasting the second largest economy in the entire world. It's an unbelievable transition. So how exactly did this kick off? Well, General Douglas MacArthur and the American occupation forces didn't pour money in out of charity. America desperately needed a capitalist ally in the Pacific because the Cold War was rapidly escalating. By 1947, the Soviets controlled Eastern Europe. Then, China fell to Mao in 1949, and the Korean War was looming right around the corner in 1950. Rebuilding Japan wasn't just a nice thing to do. It was a highly calculated strategic necessity. Section 2. Engineering the miracle now, the Japanese government systematically executed three distinct steps to fire up this economic engine. Step 1 was MacArthur's land redistribution, which essentially broke up feudal estates and turned tenant farmers into empowered owners and, importantly, consumers. Step 2 was incredibly aggressive state-directed industrial planning. And Step 3 was relying on a workforce that was willing to endure brutal hours, accepting low pay and incredible personal sacrifice, all for the sake of national survival. Now, here's a crucial point. Japan didn't rely on a typical free market to rebuild. Enter MIT, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. MIT essentially acted as a central planner. They would literally pick corporate winners in strategic sectors, like steel, shipbuilding, and electronics, and then funnel resources directly to them through cheap loans, tax breaks, and heavy import protection. It was brilliant central planning, dressed up as capitalism. And their secret weapon? Well, actually, it was starting from absolute zero. Because their legacy factories were completely destroyed, Japanese engineers were free to tour the world, copy the best ideas from America and Europe, and ruthlessly improve upon them without being held back by outdated systems. Sony didn't invent the transistor, right? But they miniaturized it. Toyota didn't invent the assembly line, but they perfected it with just-in-time manufacturing. They basically became the world's best copycats, and then the world's best innovators. Section 3. The hidden costs. But, this kind of rapid engineered growth, it carried an incredibly heavy price tag. While the overall economy roared, the wealth sure wasn't shared equally. The massive pre-war monopolies, known as the zaibatsu, were supposed to be broken up. Instead, they just rebranded. They became the keiretsu, these massive interlinked corporate conglomerates tying together banks, manufacturers, and trading companies. They effectively controlled the entire economy, capturing all the benefits while being heavily protected by the government. And in the process, they actively squeezed out small businesses and suppressed workers' wages. And honestly, the human cost was even darker. This relentless push gave rise to a term called karoshi, which literally translates to death from overwork. Recognized officially as a phenomenon in the 1970s, it stemmed directly from salarymen grinding through 70 to 80-hour work weeks. The human exhaustion was just staggering. You had employees sleeping under their desks and literally dying of heart attacks in their 40s, all to fuel this national expansion. The economic miracle was entirely built on human exhaustion. Japan is the villain and the aspiration. That really sums up the vibe by the 1980s. Giants like Sony, Panasonic, and Honda were so globally dominant that Americans were genuinely terrified. If you look back at American pop culture from that era, movies like Die Hard or Back to the Future Part 2, Japanese businessmen were always depicted as this unstoppable force, literally buying up the United States. They were the ultimate competitors, and the whole world was watching in awe. To put the sheer absurdity of this late 80s bubble into perspective, at the absolute peak of this frenzy, driven by massive corporate debt and exploding real estate prices, the Imperial Palace grounds in Tokyo were valued higher than all the real estate in the entire state of California combined. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. Everyone knew it was a bubble, but they just kept buying anyway because Japan seemed completely invincible. So, tracing our chronological hinge points here, we started with absolute ruin and the surrender in 1945, hit the Olympic triumphs in 1968, and rode that incredible high right through the 80s. But 1985, specifically the Plaza Accord, is the definitive moment. That is the critical transition point that set the stage for the massive system-breaking crash in 1991. The 1985 Plaza Accord really is the ultimate hinge point of this entire story. The United States basically forced Japan to let the yen appreciate. And overnight, that made Japanese goods way more expensive globally, completely killing the cheap exports that had fueled their growth for decades. To compensate for those dying exports, the Japanese government slashed interest rates, flooding the domestic economy with cheap credit. And it was that exact action that inflated the massive real estate and stock market bubble that spectacularly popped in 1991. The trap of stagnation, 260%. Think about that number. That is Japan's modern debt-to-GDP ratio, the absolute highest in the developed world. And why did it get so high? Because instead of doing the painful thing and letting bloated, inefficient companies fail after the crash, the government repeatedly bailed them out in the name of social stability. They propped up these zombie companies to protect millions of jobs, ballooning their national debt to astronomical levels. And here's the thing. By aggressively protecting the old, they completely missed the new. While the rest of the world transitioned to software, services, and the internet, spawning massive new global innovators like Apple, Google, Samsung, and Alibaba, Japan completely missed the modern innovation wave. Because they chose to protect legacy manufacturing jobs, their corporate champions today are exactly the same ones from the 1980s, Sony, Nintendo, and Toyota. So the really crucial takeaway from this whole explainer is this concept of the echo, the exact mechanisms that successfully rebuilt Japan from the ashes, the kairatsu monopolies, the cultural expectation of lifetime employment, and this deep systemic risk aversion. They all became the heavy anchors preventing the country from evolving. What worked perfectly for catching up became fatal when it was time to actually lead. Invention requires risk. It requires failure and creative destruction, and the Japanese model strictly prohibited all of that. Ultimately, they chose stability over dynamism, which leaves us with a pretty critical, unresolved question. Is it possible to have an economic miracle twice? Or does every economic boom eventually become a trap? As we look at other rapidly rising economies today, we have to ask if reaching the frontier inevitably turns the very strategies of success into the chains of stagnation. You can grow incredibly fast by copying, for sure, but once you reach the top, the rules fundamentally change. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this chronological journey leaves you thinking about how the very systems we built to survive might, one day, be the exact things that hold us back.